And we are live, I believe. I hope. Yes. Okay. I think we are. Yes. All right. Welcome everybody to Terrapon Live. We are finally up and going here. We are talking today about cosplay. So I've put on all my duds and gotten all set for the evening here. So joining me for the discussion, we have our some of our most cosplay active members. Um, we've got our friend John Solomon. How you doing? Our other council member, Jared Miracle. He's yep, there you go, in his Navy best. And then we have our friends down in Florida, Deso and Anna. How you guys doing? And Javier coming in from New York. So we're glad to have everybody here on the program today. So yes, like I said, today we are talking about cosplay because this is a big part of it. Now, we are usually all about martial arts and sports and, that kind of thing. And we usually talk about it sometimes in costume and all of that. But today we're talking directly about it and its importance in everything that we're doing. Now, where do costumes come in as far as like real martial arts and all of that? Well, we all have uniforms if we go to most martial arts. At least most martial arts have uniforms, at least the Asian ones. I know that HEMA clubs will have, T-shirts that people could wear and all of this other stuff, something that shows solidarity. Now, the thing about it is we are kind of inventing a lot of stuff that's living in a kind of alternate universe, something that's completely distinct from what we see, every day here. And that gives us the opportunity to really kind of go wild with the imagination. Now, you can say that we have to stick within Star Wars, but that's not necessarily true. Star Wars takes from a lot of different places. So you have a lot of actual real world stuff, especially recently in The Mandalorian. If people are watching that, you can identify actual products that you could buy today off of Amazon being used by some of the characters. So it's not always, you don't always necessarily have to go tailor-made from a galaxy far, far away to get that same look. We'll talk all kinds about that, about budgets and different purposes. But part of that kind of gestalt for your martial art is this kind of identity. And a lot of that identity is kind of embodied in a uniform. Even if your class doesn't use uniforms, say like in a Kung Fu class, lots of Kung Fu classes don't use uniforms in class, but you do tend to use uniforms in competition. Again, this is all part of kind of bringing forth this idea of what the martial art is about, where it came from, all of that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean any of it is true. The history of particular uniforms can be just as fictional as the costumes that we are using for Star Wars. So, and Jared, we can probably kind of talk about that real quick. The belt, now the story of the black belt, of getting it, wearing it and not washing it, and it getting dirtier and dirtier and dirtier, right? While there may be some truth to the idea that if you see somebody with a really, tattered uniform and grubby belt, that they've got a whole lot of experience, but that's a story that is told about that uniform that is supposed to that, and there's not that much truth to that.
Swimming. You have Olympic swimming to thank for that, as well as the influence of the French military on Jigoro Kano.
Oh, really?
It's so Kano, perhaps even more so than his interest in judo, wanted to popularize athletic swimming in Japan. and you can't see in the water who is whom very easily. So he wanted to assign specific colored belts or trunks or something to each of the swimming students so that you would know who to watch out for.
Wow.
And then that just sort of naturally found its way into a dojo.
Yes. So yeah. So as you can see, there's a good deal of storytelling involved in all of this. So we'll just we'll just kind of keep it there. Anyway, so obviously when we're talking about costumes, we start with kind of a Jedi, right, kind of thing going on here. I've got that going on. There are certain things we'll talk about the different costume organizations. Obviously, John and Jared are members of the Rebel Legion and 501st, respectively. Maybe some crossover even. I'm not sure. They're very active in this stuff. So anyway, and then there's obviously all kinds of like hybrid stuff that you can do. Lots of people do and we'll check in with Anna here. They do the I don't know what you would call it. I guess you can call it, we would call it back in the day, gender bending, where you take one character and imagine them as another gender. Like the female Kylo Rens and all of that kind of thing. Not talking about females who dress up as Kylo Ren, talking about the costumes that do that and that kind of thing, or do like the Iron Man Kylo Ren, or whatever, that kind of thing. So there's lots of that kind of stuff. So yes, so there you go. I would say, and we can jump in here. I'm kind of wearing the basic accoutrements for this. A tunic. There's usually maybe an under tunic in there, your tabards like that, and then of course a robe, belt, all of that. And if I can go back here, nice boots. Right, we always got to have nice boots, which is kind of weird. They're all dressed like monks, and then they have these nice boots. But hey, where do you go? So anyway, I will open it up to John, actually. So I'll just open it up to everybody too. But now we mostly take the Jedi stuff from the prequel era, right? We can doot. Gotta unmute everybody.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah. My Jedi costume is all based on prequel era combination. My wife based it on a combination of Mace Windu and Qui-Gon. In the traditional under tunics, she designed very much based on traditional martial arts skis, or traditional hand-pea wraps, or just simple overlapping Japanese, worker clothes essentially. For the under tunic to get a nice high collar, keep it tight. And then her complaint about getting a really nice over tunic was that she had to make it more like a fitted suit jacket. That's not always necessary. My wife's a bit of a perfectionist, so when she made it, she put a lot of work into it. But getting into the really traditional style prequel era robes and tunics is it's the base everybody goes on. But that's I was going to babble. Please, someone else say something.
Yeah, I know what you mean though. That is it's the base that we go on. I've always had a little bit of a weird, like when the prequels came out, the first thing, I was a little disappointed seeing how they did that, because they all based it on the original Obi-Wan, outfit, which I had been going on the assumption that was just desert bum clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't. So it was kind of weird seeing them all being in uniform. But now I know. Now we obviously that's set. Um,
It's also interesting though that you do see a couple of like background characters in the cantina wearing basically the same thing.
yeah,
So I think the real intention of the Jedi robe look, even in the prequel era, is that they're supposed to look very common, right?
right.
It's supposed to be very unpretentious, very humbling, that they wear very simple, you know, rough, rough, woven garments for the most part. I mean, obviously there are Jedi, they're the exception, and some of them are very cool, and and then you get into the Clone Wars cartoon, and then you start adding armor, which for those of us that do like combative sports becomes you know even cooler, right? Because now we have to make armor.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. Because if you look at even like current Mandalorian, you look at the people in the background, the kind of overlapping thing, uh, belt or what have you. Um, that style, that recipe seems to be common. The most common thing you see out there. So
In Rogue One, Jen Erso's mom is wearing Jedi-like robes, and she gave her the crystal, which is supposedly a kyber crystal, but because she was wearing the robes, there was a part of me when I saw, I'm like, oh, maybe she is a force sensitive. But then going by what John said earlier, like it's supposed to be common. In the prequel, in the first episode, there's a scene where Anakin asks Qui-Gon, "Are you a Jedi?" And the reason that he asks why is because he says, "I saw your laser sword." So it's like they're wearing common clothing, but as soon as somebody sees that there's a lightsaber there, they're like, "Oh, it's a Jedi."
yeah, sure. I always took to basically took that as you could accomplish that just with your robe too. So you could, because everybody, especially on Tatooine's, running around in robes, right? It's kind of like being in the Middle East. Everybody's wearing that type of clothing. Anyway, okay.
So boots,
Mm,
right? So getting into the idea of the boots. Now I can grab a couple of pair of boots I have tucked over there in my kit off screen, but especially if anyone's considering looking into boots or type of footwear to wear in martial arts, and you've seen I have worn my Jedi boots a few times to
mhm.
class. They better be comfy. uh, and you better be able to still move in them. In fact, actually, it's probably good if they're a little difficult to move in because you need more practice moving in them. And lots of martial arts, right? We practice barefoot or with very minimal foot gear, and that it doesn't really mimic real life very well. I've discovered my dojo is a disaster. I have like 60-year-old mats, so they're all warped and wavy, and that's great experience for real world foot movement. But I don't advise that for anybody trying not to break an ankle. Um, but footwear should be very comfortable, and there's lots of ways to get around buying a $280 pair of motorcycle boots. Uh, as your first pair of kit, you can get a nice simple pair of boots and make gaiters, or you can get motorcycle gaiters inexpensively that have a couple buckles and strap over, just a pair of simple work boots and make them look really good, and they can be comfortable, and you can even find really lightweight ones.
Yes, but if you do go the boot route, my my advice is always don't don't skimp on the boot. Like, you usually get what you pay for in a boot, and if you can pay for for a better boot, that's going to last you a long time. I've got boots that are now like 20, 30 years old, you know. So,
And if you buy the vinyl superhero boots,
no.
you're going to smell vinyl every time you take a step. It's just the way they work. It's horrible. I mean, they're great if that's what you can afford and for costuming. But my cousin bought a pair for his X-wing pilot in black, and I've worn them a couple times when I've had to borrow them. And ooh, yeah, they're not good. Uh,
Yeah, but gators are definitely a good option. Hopefully those are more.
And those that are more skilled at various types of cosplay armoring, I've seen people make them very nicely out of uh, EVA foam and then paint them to look like leather. I don't have a lot of experience with that. I've done a little bit with foam, but that's not something I've done. I don't know if anyone else has more experience with that, working with that stuff.
I don't know. No, I think we're
It's
most
like that.
fabric over here. I was unable to, we'll get the Mandalorians back in here and start talking about armor.
Yeah, they've got some stories, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm sure there's a lot of being an armorer and making armor that's functional, even just wearable, is tricky.
It's difficult.
Yeah, I mean that's why there's so many gaps in a lot of the armor on TV, because it's just easier just to put a plate there rather than design a whole encased.
Articulation is difficult. It's
Anyway, but you can put these things together fairly inexpensively. Like you don't have to you can spend your money on one aspect of it. Karate gis and other types of gis are available in at various martial arts stores fairly inexpensively. I'm wearing a kind of like a Buddhist style robe tunic thing under here, so that's not really costume. And then these were made by Twin Roses costume, so they're you can always go to people who make these things as well, and spend a little money that way. They will usually take your measurements and and all of that. Now when you get into like more of the uniform things, that's where we can talk to Jared here about, because that gets a little bit more. You can get away with a lot with this loose fitting pajama get up, right? You don't necessarily have to get things perfectly fit. There's a little bit of wiggle room. Not exactly the case when you're dealing with something that's a little bit more tailored.
Well, and with sorry, Ann.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna point out the 501st, while in no way pretending at all to be like a paramilitary organization or anything, was founded largely by military veterans. And if you've ever talked to a Marine about his uniform, you understand what some of us have to go through when we have like hardcore COs. Things are measured, tugged on, yanked around. You have to be screen accurate.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think general cosplay is a little bit more fun and interesting in that way.
And yeah, and definitely easier. The Rebel Legion can be maybe a little less, because the Rebel Legion does theirs a little bit differently rather than local. It's organizational, so there's judges based on the in each group, and so you send pictures, so it's less in person, so which can make it a little more difficult, but also sometimes a little easier. And again, the groups can have some pretty arbitrary and very specific. I shouldn't say arbitrary. I might get in trouble for that, but it feels arbitrary at times. Issues with a particular thing. So you might get one judge, right, that is complaining about one thing, and then you resubmit a month later, and then the problem just would never have been a problem. But so hopefully, general cosplay and the things we do and TPLA and combat sports is a lot more relaxed and easygoing. Open to interpretation. I think
Correct.
that's a better idea.
And function has a lot to do with it too, right? Like I got to be able to move in this and be able to do that. Yep, exactly. We'll talk about that in a moment too. But so like so yeah, going into an officer's, cosplay or whatever, that's that's a little bit more involved, I would say, than most of this.
Most people who go into the officer corps, and actually a lot of the corps, corps, what is the plural of corps? Because that's a French word, so you don't pronounce the S. Somebody help me out here. Anyway, if you go into the officer corps, most of those people will have their suits tailored.
Yeah.
Sometimes to a quite fair extent. Although even the supposed easiest classic Imperial getup, it's probably going to be in the Jolly Roger Squadron TIE pilots, because you're basically wearing a black jumpsuit. But for instance, here's how nitpicky it can be. On the back of the jumpsuit's neck in the original trilogy, and specifically in A New Hope, there is a scene where if you zoom in close enough, you can see that there's a sort of point in the back of the jumpsuit. And I guess that was a style of certain industrial workers at that time. If you don't have that point, you shouldn't technically be approved.
Yes,
They're looking for a tiny piece of fabric on the back of the neck that you can barely even tell exists. The officer uniforms are pretty interesting, though, because they're basically World War I like officer riding outfits, which is pretty hard to source.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah. Which that World War I comment just reminded me. I don't know if any one of you knew, but the term stormtrooper was first used during World War I.
Yeah.
Right. You have to feel bad for.
I don't know if George Lucas was able to trademark that. I know he trademarked most of the things in Star Wars. I don't know if he was able to trademark that or not. That term, stormtrooper.
Maybe Imperial Stormtrooper, but Stormtrooper as a noun, there's no way.
Yeah, no.
But speaking of Stormtroopers, we referred to those guys as having hard armor, because of PVC and everything. And that stuff is not functional at all. You can't even sit down.
No.
It's pretty remarkable to actually watch these people do like a 12-hour long troop, because they can barely walk by the time they're out of uniform.
Yeah.
I honestly, so in the medieval reenactment stuff, I one time made the mistake of thinking that I could wear my suit of samurai armor for all day. And it is significantly, even with the extra pieces that I have to make it up to snuff for the heavy grade combat we do in the medieval reenactment, right? So like knee cops, elbow cops, extra plates that samurai's armor just wasn't designed to protect against. Significantly more comfortable than a suit of stormtrooper armor, and I can't imagine how those or like a hard Darth Vader costume. When you get a guy he's wearing lifts. I can't imagine the torture women have to go through wearing heels if those guys in their lifts are.
Have you seen any of the work by an academic named Daniel Jacquet?
It sounds familiar, but I might not. I'm not familiar immediately with it.
Yeah, he's presenting at a conference that's going on right now, being put on by Ma Mingda over in China right now. So.
Interesting stuff. He famously has done a bunch of. He denies that it is experimental archaeology, but as an archaeologist, I can tell you he is doing experimental archaeology, wearing old-fashioned like plate mail and whatnot armor, and then going out and running in 5Ks and climbing over walls and things like. It's pretty interesting to see how mobile these people were.
Oh, absolutely. Real armor was. I mean, when you put the screws to it, if it didn't work, they wouldn't have worn it. And there's actually some really interesting medieval comments about like mercenaries that are paid in armor, and like they get their kit of armor, and then literally like as soon as they get around the corner out of the marching off the campaign, they're pitching their arm harnesses in the ditch because they only really wanted the corselet. They only really wanted the chest armor because they don't need the armor. It's too heavy. And it's too impinging for the way they fight and the danger they're going to be in as pikemen. So they just pitch in their arm harnesses. There's some really interesting documents that a friend had pointed me towards.
Well, it's interesting about that. You can armor your arms fairly well with just a gambeson and just padded armor. You know, it won't protect you from blunt force trauma, but if you've got a sword or a shield and stuff like that, you don't really much need it. But yeah, no, armor that was made in the day, that was specifically made, was very, very mobile. People could do that. This stuff is made to look good on film. So I've been noticing too, like in the Mandalorian, when they're doing when they're doing more of the, like, the crazier stunts with the stormtroopers, where they have to do these falls and everything like that. I'm noticing they're throwing a lot of computer generated armor pieces in there that like break or explode or something like that. So the stuntman's probably got less on when they're doing these crazy falls or whatever. Or they're just completely computer generated stormtroopers.
Or it's just covering up the plastic breaking as they do the stunts,
Which I guess it gets at the question that's always in my mind of why we do this. Why would we want to wear costumes and pretend to be people who we aren't and who never existed?
That's a good question, and I think the simplest answer is I never grew out of it, I never got that beat out of me by real life, real society, right? Or society's opinions. I guess maybe that's the easiest way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
So you mean as you grew up, right? Because we do that when we're little, pretend in costumes, but then at a certain point as we grow up, society guys says, well, you're an adult, you shouldn't be doing that now. But people keep doing it. For instance, my father never has never liked anything about dressing up and Halloween, anything like that. So yeah, even to this day, when I post pictures on my Facebook, before all this hit, that I would go to, Comic Cons and compete and, post myself in costume, he doesn't understand.
No.
It's I would say to an extent, right? That's maybe other people can have opinions on it. It's maybe a generational thing, but because my father, right, it was we got him very loosely for a moment involved in the medieval reenactment group, and he just didn't take to it at all. But my mother loved it. She was very excited by it, very enchanted by the idea of the make-believe of, right, the perfect imagined medieval society, right, that we all like to believe actually existed, with knights and armor and chivalry and without the plague and the death and the and the peasants being worked to death and things like that. The things that were really horrible about life and society in the Middle Ages that nobody wants to remember much of.
Right.
But that's the same idea with Star Wars, right? I mean, the universe of Star Wars is really bad, right? There's really bad things that happen, and it's usually take the strong way, Jared, but propagated by the Empire, as we've seen, right? They're the bad guys, but their characters, the image of a strong army led by a powerful individual, right, evoke the fear that we love, right? Because we know it's make believe. So it's cool, right? When you're at a con and you see a bunch of stormtroopers on their march, following Darth Vader, that's a really super powerful image, And if anyone's seen the pictures of the 501st or the Rebel Legion or the Mando Mercs, right? There's been a bunch of viral videos going around recently about the Mercs on their march through Celebration, and that really evokes a very strong emotion, especially because we love Star Wars, right? None of us would be here if we didn't love Star Wars and all that entails. But also that the chance to escape, right, our TPS reports, right, that we spend all day filling out for work, and other, boredoms of our normal society, nor not necessarily society, but life, right? Yeah. It gives us a chance to live and experience the entertainment we really love. And our fairy tales, right? I mean, that's Star Wars is a fairy tale.
It's a heroism thing, really. You have this desire
to not be powerless, to not be weak or whatever, and dressing up as these characters, Empire, fantasy, whatever it is, whatever character it is that you particularly vibe with, if you will. There's strength in that. So going to a con dressed as something, even if you've done it the once, you really relish that feeling. That's why we take pictures. That's why when people come up to you and say, hey, I'd like to have a picture with you, they're having a little bit of that, and they're sharing a little bit of that with you as well.
Yeah. Yep.
John, I do have to pick one bone with you. I do have a sound clip from George Lucas saying, quote, "The stormtroopers are the good guys."
I was in that room when he said that. I was 30 feet from the man when he said that. So yes, they just work for bad people, and that's But yeah, you're absolutely right. Stormtroopers are good guys. They just work for a bad man.
Did you see that meme going around about the end of not this episode, but the last week's episode of The Mandalorian? Spoilers, if you haven't seen it, turn off the sound, whatever. It's been a week. You should freaking have seen it by now if you haven't.
Yeah.
Anyway, the end of the thing where they've got Baby Yoda there, Grogu, and they shoot him with the stun gun.
Don't tase me, bro.
They put the little
Cuffs
on, and then the stormtrooper. They go to the stormtrooper. He's like, wait a second. We have baby handcuffs? Are we the bad guys?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think the idea of getting out of the mundane and into something that we value, almost ideologically, not even almost, literally ideologically, because Star Wars is a fairy tale that we're all choosing to believe in. It points to the larger scope of what's going on in your mind at any given moment. Whatever you're wearing, if you put on a suit and tie and you go off to do whatever society is deemed as appropriate to do in a suit and tie, you will feel different and take on a different persona than if you're wearing a t-shirt and jeans. And I think in general, this tends to be the case. We are all choosing to live in some kind of a fiction, whether it's I have a boss at work and I have to pee on to whatever that person says, even though if we were out in the wilderness, this person would just be another breathing organism. We're all choosing to engage in a fiction. It's just which fiction do you choose to enjoy? I happen to like ones that involve lasers and spaceships and tiny little Yoda. So, it's no more strange than people who get into golf.
No. But here's the really strange part about it, because we're all talking about this, and one of the things that we always bring up is escapism. We're escaping the mundanity of our daily lives, right? But look at all the mundanity we take on for this. All these tiny little details, like when you're an Imperial officer or a stormtrooper, you are literally dressing up like the schlub of the cog. You are the cog. You are the mindless drone. So it's like, I'm going to escape my mindless droneness by dressing up as a mindless drone. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's a strange irony.
My favorite part about that is when we do troops where we're allowed to be in character, because it's not always the best to be in character. If we're visiting kids in the hospital, you kind of have to ride the line. But if we get to hardcore be in character, we have all, if you've been on a few troops by the time you're there, you have figured out your counter arguments to present to the children, which is just a ton of fun. Because they'll try to, especially like around age 12, they really want to argue about why are you doing whatever Vader says? Well, he's my manager and I want to retain my health insurance.
What if my kids need their teeth cleaned, right? Who's going to pay for that?
You know how hard it is to get a dental appointment on the Death Star?
Yeah, I can't wait till some more of the Galaxy Edge employees get a chance to do some of that, because everybody and their brother is coming up there to like mess with them, and they've got First of all, the stormtroopers that are walking around Galaxy's Edge, they've all got these like recorded things. I mean, whoever set all of these things up, they got everybody's number because they have one for every eventuality, and it's pretty funny.
So the natural follow-up to that then is, where is the intersection of cosplay and lightsabers, and other athletics or combat sports? We were talking about Terrace Kasi, the other day. Why would we want to dress up as the characters in order to play this sport? And I would throw out there, for instance, there are a lot of martial arts where you put on a costume to perform them, even if the costume is not necessary. I'm looking at you, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is incredibly popular right now. You don't need to wear those pajamas, but you choose to, and have all the patches and the weird insignia and stuff on them. I would also point out that there have been a couple of randomized trials where they had people engaging in athletic activities while wearing different types of clothing. People who dress for athletics tend to perform slightly better than those who don't.
And I think the obvious answer is, right, it goes back to what you said, when you don those garments and you choose the fiction you're going to participate in, then that makes it better. So Anonymous has seen this several times. This is my basic Lacrosse shoulder guard. This is a inexpensive light padding. I wear a padded shirt underneath it, but because I hated white vinyl, I covered it by hand in leather. I mean, the whole thing, it's all hand stitched, covered in very nice upholstery leather that I happen to have, because I couldn't stand wearing white vinyl, because I was a Jedi. And because I was a Jedi, right, I made hardened leather bazubans, I think that's how you pronounce it, right, with foam padding to have the necessary elbow protection. And because I can't and wouldn't put the effort into making knee guards, I wear just simple shin guards to tie it all together to protect my nice boots, or to get away with not wearing nice boots while I do combat. And it's because, right, a Jedi wouldn't necessarily, I don't feel that a Jedi, at least in my fiction, would wear lacrosse armor, straight up. Now, I think perhaps, right, the Clone Wars, tells us maybe they would just throw some white plastic on just to make the clones feel like they're participating properly. But it's to engage in the fiction, right? Just like you said, there's the uniform culture, right? Especially in martial arts. I know, I'm sure you've seen it, right? I mean, every sword school has, like, their own, they all fight over each, don't fight necessarily, but each one, for demonstrations of things, right? They have a very particular uniform that they wear, right? What type of top, what type of hakama, so on and so forth. So they're all very uniform for demonstrations, and that's great. And maybe in training things are looser, and that goes by dojo. But in my school, we wear Aikido gis and just black hakama because our teacher was originally an Aikidoka. Swordsmanship kind of became the focus of his life, but it was, his second real love of martial arts after Aikido. So that's carried on. Now things are maybe changing, but is what it is. And like you said, when we engage in the chosen fiction, right, it helps us perform better. Maybe I'd like to think so, because I need all help I can get.
Well, I think not just the clothes, but the mere fact that you give anyone a stunt saber, that has no sound. As soon as they turn it on, they'll go boom, and they start swinging around and they make noises. I mean, I remember the first classes in Ithaca Sabers, and people go normally there. We were all doing it, just turning it on and going boom, making the sound. So it's not, I think in this case, not just the costume, but the mere fact of having, a light sword.
So, yeah. But the costume being a tool to connect to what you're doing is really, really important, I think, because it's the same thing within martial arts. Like you said with jujitsu, Jared, right? You wear the gi for a specific time. You got those patches, and those all indicate something, you know, for you, for the people watching, for your classmates, all of that kind of thing. When I perform and I'm wearing some sort of kung fu outfit, it's to go, you know, harken back to this kind of imaginary time of kung fu, because kung fu uniforms are not historical clothing. Historical clothing looked a little bit different, but it's based on that, you know, and it gives you that flavor. Like you said, the Japanese hakama and all of those things that go into, you know, the of what we're doing. It adds a reality to it, right? It adds dimension to it, right? So that when we're swinging our saber around, we don't have to be looking at it. We don't have to be concentrating on it. We don't even have to have it, right? We can look down at our own selves and be like, you know, here I am, right? People are liking going to Galaxy's Edge, or when people were going to Galaxy's Edge, you know, in costume and, you know, and all of this kind of stuff, because again, it connects us to, you know, to the world. So I think for us doing that, you know, doing costumes, it's important for us doing it with sabers, because it helps connect us to the tool. It helps connect us to the stories, you know, to whatever story we have in our mind, right? Because we can tailor these things to as much as you want. And if you look through the old, you know, any of the costume books that they have out, like in the prequel books, you'll see there's a fair amount of variation too between the Jedi and all that. And like we said, I would like to see more people cosplaying as normal everyday people. Because, you know, moisture farmers and food vendors and stuff like that. You know, everybody's a Jedi or a soldier or something like that. You know, who's cooking the burgers? But anyway, so that's the kind of reality thing I think of when I'm thinking of these costumes and all that kind of stuff. But now we've got this other thing where cosplay is a thing in of itself. And so you get into sabering, you're going to get into costuming. You may find that costuming holds a special passion for you. Very much like our apprentice Anna here. And you can really take that to, you know, really wherever you are. You know, all bets are off. So why don't I turn it over to you, Anna, here real quick, and you can bring us through a little bit of that. Bring it on mute. There we go.
Well, I definitely have very differing opinions where I personally don't like dressing up for training at all. That's a completely separate thing that I do. I prefer just training clothes instead of getting in cosplay for that.
Let me stop you there real quick. I am not saying that we are training in these clothes.
No. I know. I was just adding to the conversation what other people said where they enjoy doing that. For me personally, I don't. I am huge on budget cosplay. I have 61 cosplays under my belt, and majority of them I made. You don't have to worry about having stuff tailor-made. You can go to Goodwill and find stuff, cut it up, and repurpose it to have a nice, quick, simple, basic Jedi look, basic Sith look, whatever. It's amazing what you can do with what's already out there. One of my, I get asked to do Sith a lot. I have been very much typecasted as a villain, which I'm okay with. But a lot of my stuff came from Goodwill. It was old dresses and stuff that I cut up, and you just add belts to them. You don't have to put a ton of money or detail into it unless you want to. It's about the idea of it and the expression, not the literal, it has to look like it came from the film or a book. Cosplay should be about having fun first and foremost, even with all of this. That's my personal take.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're Yeah, that's the thing. When we're talking about how this is connecting, it's like costuming goes hand in hand with this kind of stuff. Now, if you are demonstrating out there, and it doesn't matter what you're doing, right? Whether you're doing completely fantasy thing, where you're trying to be, Rebel Legion, specific, to be approved, and all of that kind of thing. If you are going to do movement, if you are going to do any type of movement whatsoever, and it doesn't even have to be sparring or anything like that, you have to wear your costume at least a couple of times and move in that thing, because it can be tricky, especially with different fasteners depending on what you're using. But yeah, that's not what I'm talking about with training though. But yeah,
I design my stuff around mobility, and I cosplay as a Twi'lek. That's one of the things that I'm known for as well. And you have to keep in mind spatial awareness when you're adding anything on. The dangly bits, the details, those look great animated or in drawings, but the reality of it in motion are something completely different. And I'm going to say something, I'm the other end of the Star Wars cosplay spectrum. I actively chose not to join 501st and Rebel Legion. I have friends who do it and I'm happy for them, but it's just not something I'm interested in. And that's okay too. You don't have to do one or the other. It's okay to just have fun with it. And I know plenty of people who aren't in any organization and they still want their stuff to look like it came from a film. They use those guidelines to build it. And, what's approvable isn't always something you can move in. I mean, many of us know that Jedi robes are a pain in the butt to try to move in sometimes when designed a certain way. So if you're going to fight in them, I highly recommend, like you said, doing a test run, try out your motion, see how that's going to work, customize it for you and how you move. It's very important to do that. Because I have tripped in here.
I am totally with the movement part of things. When we were doing Javier's fan films, I quickly learned that you couldn't have the shoulder range of motion with the Jedi costume on. And most of my costumes that I do for runs are, you have to run in them, so they're very mobility oriented, and also goodwill. I do a lot of that as well.
I found it's very important to make sure that your tabards are attached at your collar.
Mhm.
I think we did a little thing on TV it feels like it was almost 2 years ago, and it was a very hard fit because I wanted to throw my tabards over top of my training gear because I don't wear my full tunic that it attaches to. So it was like, when it gets done, it's all tied around your arm and you can't lift your arm up because it's falling over and
yeah.
So it's very important to make sure your tabards are attached.
Yeah, that's probably the number one wardrobe malfunction with Jedi I see out there is the loose tabard that goes down there, and it does. I've seen it. It happens even if you don't have, even if you're not doing a whole lot of movement. Just reaching stuff. If you don't have them attached. Personal experience. Yeah, I got a thing going, which is a nice little fur coat, so I don't have that problem with this thing.
Now, on the topic of wardrobe malfunction in space, which is a mild allusion to the George Lucas Carrie Fisher back and forth about underwear in space. As far as I'm concerned, personally, people who are able to work with fabric are one step removed from being wizards. How might one go about, where would you start if you'd have no experience with it?
There you go. Just throw that over to Anna.
So when I want to give a bit of a backstory. When I first got into cosplay, I had no idea how to sew. And my whole family asked me to put together cosplays for them. I made a steampunk Catwoman. I made a Dalek. I made a Weeping Angel and other stuff. And we all show up to do this commercial for a con. And it's Florida. It's hot. And our outfits literally started melting because the hot glue melted. I went home crying. And that day I learned how to use a sewing machine because I was just so embarrassed. It's going to be trial and error. YouTube and Google are your best friend on how to go about working with different fabrics. If you're using a sewing machine, look up what fabric goes with what needle and just experiment and understand your sewing machine won't eat you. I always tell people get scrap fabric and practice sewing that first and go from there. That's what I did to help take the edge off of it. And you're always going to learn something new. When you first read a pattern, it looks like Greek. Over time, the more you do it, the easier it gets. Most Star Wars outfits like Jedi robes and things like that, well, tunics and everything are made with linen. A lot of medieval cosplayers also use a lot of linen. And it's a fairly easy fabric to work with. Just practice, 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 like with anything. The more you do it, the easier it gets. Do you have any specific fabrics you have questions about?
I'm such a neophyte that I think I would get myself in trouble trying to work with it right now, but I'm really interested in performance fabrics later on. You know, Under Armour, stretchy polyester based stuff, because I think there is a great deal of potential. That's what I'm thinking about, right? Like, if you're going to be in the hot Florida sun, why would you not use as much of this as possible?
So bodysuits are something that you either love or you hate making. I personally love making bodysuits. I do a lot of like superhero type characters where I've had to make those bodysuits. Working with stretchy fabric does require technique. There's a certain needle you need to use for it, and you have to be patient because there's a certain way you need to stretch it. But it's about confidence. The fabric can sense fear. So it's for something like that, there's nothing wrong with buying a bodysuit. But if you want to do that extra mile to customize it to fit you, I recommend buying fabric quarters of it and just practice that stretch, because there's a certain way to do it that doesn't overstretch it and everything, so you can understand how it moves. I think the hardest part, everyone would agree, is sewing in a zipper. That's the devil's work. But once you get that down, it's amazing to wear something you made. It's great. Yeah. Don't fear the machine, fear the fabric. It's true. Someone commented.
So speaking of the machine, I have received conflicting reports from people I know who can actually do fabric. Does it, I guess, to what extent does it matter what kind of machine you're using? Can you start with an inexpensive one, or is that one of those mistakes like buying a cheap tool set?
I have experience with the machine I use is a 45-year-old, it's probably a 50-ish year old cast iron Singer. When to date this machine, I had to pay Singer like $45 to print me a manual when I received it from my brother's mother-in-law, when she realized she was going to use it. And it has tips on for women before they start sewing on how to make sure the house is clean and dinner's prepared so that they can relax, right? Just to date the machine, not to comment on anything, but the machine is very dated. And
man,
so
I would totally never want to date a machine like that. Can you imagine how overbearing it is?
It's pretty harsh. And it weighs like 45 pounds. So I've managed to do some sewing. My wife is the miracle worker seamstress. She's made all of our medieval reenactment clothes and so on and so forth. And as I commented earlier, linen, everything. But it's serviceable. And it can do many things very simply. Maybe the more experienced seamstresses and seamsters have different opinions.
So it's really going to just differ. Every machine has its own quirks. I've worked with digital, I've worked with old ones. Honestly, basic machines can work just fine as long as you can change the type of stitch, whether it's using a knob or it's using a digital touchpad. Troubleshooting is going to be your best friend no matter what you do. like I said, when I finally learned how to sew, I used YouTube. You can just put in the type of machine you're using, and someone has had a problem with it. They can help you. Every machine is capable of working with fabric. Some just have more features that make it easier to do. Basic ones don't have as much detailing you can work with, but you don't need a machine that also does embroidery unless you plan on doing embroidery as well. So I have a basic brother that I use. I know people that have the industrial, it takes up a whole wall setup for what they do. Basics can work just as well as the really expensive stuff. It all depends on what you're comfortable with. So if in your budget you can only afford a hand-me-down that someone is selling or just a basic machine, go for it. There's no shame in that, and it's going to do just fine.
I would, however, caution against getting the cheap machines that you see at like Joann and all of that, simply because they tend to break a lot. Like they're not, you know, they're kind of rushed out. If you have a sewing center in your area, that's probably a better place to go to get the actual machine. They'll have them for every budget and all the way up, you know, from basic to this. But like some of those like Kmart ones are just like, I mean, I knew they would explode. You end up spending more money because you have to buy them over again. But
what's the Kmart?
I don't know. There was a little singer, those stupid little singers for like $45 or something like that.
So
I was kidding.
They even still have Kmart anymore?
no,
Exactly. No, they don't.
GoBots, they're like the Kmart Transformers.
Yeah, I live actually right around the corner from the last Kmart.
Wow.
It was right here in Flint. Yeah, it was the last one.
Oh, it's closed.
Yeah, oh, it's gone. It's a U-Haul now. It's a U-Haul storage center.
Well, I was gifted a sewing machine. The first one that I ever got was just one of those $80 ones, and I made some of my favorite cosplays on that. So as long as you know how to take care of a machine, I highly recommend troubleshooting, looking up how to do different things on there. You can make a machine last. Also, machines have the same functionality. They all move the same way. It's just how you load what's called the bobbin. Can be a top loader or a side loader, but the way you thread the machine, the function of it, feed dogs, all those different details are all the same. It's just the little details that make it different.
On the subject of machines that have issues the most, the ones that are the most impractical are the digital ones, because if the board goes out, you got to get a new board. Whereas the analog machines,
you can hand fix it.
She can pretty much fix anything when it comes to those.
I'm a very hands-on person. Someone was moving, and as a housewarming gift, we had just moved into our house. I was given a beautiful digital machine, and the motherboard on it went out. I can't fix that, and it was just as much to get it repaired as it was to just get a new machine. But then I was given another cheap little machine, and that one's worked for me just fine. It's a little temperamental, but I can hand fix it, no problem. So it's really what you want to do. Look up reviews, see what other people have to say, and go from there.
I was going to make a comment about learning how to solder to fix lightsabers, right? So
Yeah, there you go.
applicable skills, right?
Exactly. So we got one little question here on the super chat. Says, I recommend washing the fabric before cutting and sewing. Do you agree?
Yes. Yeah,
Always.
Especially with linen, the more you wash it, the easier it is to work with. Also, since fabrics will change how they move once they've been washed, some fabrics might shrink, some fabrics shed. You want to go ahead and wash that so that way your fabric is ready to go right after. You always want to wash your fabric if it's washable.
Yeah.
You might even, depending on the thing, you might even get some bleed, right? A little bit of bleed from the dye, depending on quality of the dye and stuff.
And some fabric stores treat their fabrics before they put them out on the floor, so you're able to wash that out if that's what they have to do. So always wash your fabrics. Follow the directions on how to wash the fabric, because not all fabrics are created equal.
Very true. Very true. All righty. Well, we are kind of coming to the end here, the end of the hour. So I guess encapsulating everything is costuming. While it may seem ancillary, it may seem frivolous or whatever, it actually plays a pretty important role, not only in what we do in our hobby and our sport and all of that and training stuff like that, but in our society, in our everyday lives, right? These things get, how we dress and all of that kind of gives us that feeling. It helps bring us to these places. If you go to Galaxy's Edge, you're going to find lots of costumes that are in there, and that's the reason why people are buying them, because they want to get them, they want to feel part of it. So, but you can do this with anything. You can go find stuff at your local thrift store. You can find stuff in your own closet. You can make it. You can find somebody to make it for you. There's lots of vendors who will do it for you. There's all things that you can repurpose. Feel free to do it. And there's something for everybody. If you're into the exactness and trying to get stuff, screen accurate and all of that, you've got, those groups. If you're looking to go off on wild flights of fancy, totally acceptable as well. So there's something for everybody in doing this. Don't be afraid of it. Don't poo-poo it and don't shove it to the side. It's an integral part of it. So I will say thank you to our panel for this evening. I will not keep you any longer. Thank you for all of your expertise and our discussions. Thank you for the questions on there. If there's any questions that we've got here, go ahead and ask them in the comments. We'll try to get them answered for you. Here we've run out of time, so I will leave for tonight. We go ahead and hook up with us on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and all of that kind of thing. So from everybody here at TPLA, patience, practice, perseverance, happy sabering. Okay.